Hello, Assalamualaikum, and a very good day to everyone. Okay, for week 11, we will present about theories of learning. So, in our presentation today, we will talk about three different theories of learning, which is observational learning, classical conditioning, and also operant conditioning. For Banduras, observational learning is a learning that involves acquiring skills, strategies, and beliefs by observing others. So, this is a learning process that happen by observing. So there are four processes in observational learning, which is attention. Before a student can produce a model's action, they must attend to what the model is doing or saying. So this is the process of attention. The next one is the process of retention. To reproduce a model's actions, students must code the information and keep it in memory so that they can retrieve it. Next, children might attend to a model and code in memory what they have seen, but because of limitation in their motor ability, they will probably not be able to reproduce the model's behavior. And this is the process of production. And lastly, the process of motivation. Often children attend to what the model says or does, retain the information in memory, and possess the motor skills to perform the action, but are not motivated to perform the model behavior. So they will need to use reinforcement or incentive for the process of motivation. The behavioral approaches emphasize the importance of children making connection between experiences and behavior. So learning by observing need to make connection between experience and behavior because we observe the behavior and what we observe will become our experience, and this experience is the thing that we had learned by observing. Okay, that's all from me. I will pass this presentation to my friend. Thank you.
Um, thank you. I'll continue the presentation with next theory by Pavlov. So it is called Pavlov classical conditioning. Classical conditioning was the brainchild of Ivan Pavlov in 1927. Classical conditioning is a type of learning in which an organism learns to connect or associate and stimuli. In classical conditioning, a neutral stimulus, such as the sight of a person, become associated with a meaningful stimulus such as food and acquires the capacity to elicit a similar response. During the 1890s, Russian psychologist Ivan Pavlov was researching salivation in dogs in response to being fed. He had inserted a small test tube into the cheek of each dog to measure saliva when the dogs were fed with a powder made from meat. So he used a powder made from meat to check the dog um, saliva when the dogs were fed. Pavlov predicted the dogs would salivate in response to the food placed in front of them, but he noticed that his dogs would begin to salivate whenever they heard the footstep of his assistant who was bringing them the food. In behaviorist term, food is an unconditioned stimulus and salivation is an unconditioned response. Stimulus response connection that required no learning. Unconditioned stimulus, food. Unconditioned response, salivate. In his experiment, Pavlov used a metronome as his neutral stimulus. By itself, the metronome did not elicit a response from the dogs. Neutral stimulus, metronome. No conditioned response. Pavlov began to conditioning procedure whereby the clicking metronome was introduced just before he gave food to his dogs. After a number of repeats, after a number of trials of the procedures, he presented the metronome on its own. Okay, as you might expect, the sound of the clicking metronome on its own now caused an increase in salivation. Conditioned stimulus, metronome, and conditioned response, salivate. For the conclusion, An unconditioned stimulus, UCS, is a stimulus that automatically produces a response without any prior learning. The second one is an unconditioned response, or we call it UCR, is an unlearned response that is automatically allocated by the UCS. A conditioned stimulus, CS, is a previously neutral stimulus that eventually elicites a conditioned response after being associated with the UCS. A conditioned response, CR, is a learned response to the conditioned stimulus that occurs after UCS-CS pairing. So that's all from me. I'll pass the presentation to the next presenter.
Assalamualaikum. So next, me Mohammad Rizwan bin Aman. I will present about the Pavlov classical conditioning in classroom. So first is acquisition. Acquisition is the initial stage of learning when a response is first established and gradually strengthened. During the acquisition phase of classical conditioning, a neutral stimulus is repeatedly paired with unconditioned stimulus. So next is extinction. Extinction is when the occurrence of conditioning response decrease or disappear. In classical conditioning, this happens when a conditioned stimulus is no longer paired with unconditioned stimulus. So next is spontaneous recovery. Sometimes a learned response can suddenly reemerge even after a period of extension. Spontaneous recovery, the reappearance of the conditioned response after the rest period or period of lessened response. So next is stimulus generalization. Stimulus generalization is the tendency for the conditioned stimulus to evoke similar response after the response has been conditioned. For example, if a dog has been conditioned to salivate at the sound of a bell, the animal may also exhibit the same response to stimuli that are similar to the conditioned stimulus. So next is the stimulus discrimination. Discrimination is the ability to differentiate between a conditioned stimulus and other stimuli that have not been paired with an unconditioned stimulus. Teacher can use classical conditioning to quiet down the student. Example, first day of class, student walk into class and teacher sit at desk. Teacher goes towards board when ready to teach and children quiet down. Second day of class, student are chatty when the teacher goes to the board, teacher asks to be quiet. Third day of class, students are automatically quiet when the teacher walks to the board.
Reinforcement is actually reward, which is a consequence that increase the probability that behavior will occur. This can be positive or negative reinforcement. For example, you might tell one of your students, "Congratulations, I'm really proud of the story that you wrote." If the student work harder and write an even better story for the next time, your positive comments are said to reinforce or reward the student writing behavior. Another example is if you frown at a student for talking in the class and the student talking decrease, your frown is said to punish the student talking. Operant conditioning is referred as instrumental conditioning or Skinnerian conditioning is a form of learning which the consequence of behavior produce changes in the probability that the behavior will occur. Operant conditioning is at the heart of B.F. Skinner 1938 behavioral view. Skinner believed that it was not really necessary to look at internal thought and motivation in order to explain behavior. Instead, he suggests we should look only at the external, observable cause of human behavior. True operant conditioning and association is made between a behavior and consequences, whether reward or punishment, depend on that organism behavior. Domjan 2019 said to reinforce behavior means to strengthen the behavior. There are two terms of the reinforcement, which is positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. Positive reinforcement, which is something added, and negative reinforcement is something subtract or remove. It is the easy way to remember the difference of the two terms.
So, hello, I will continue about the presentation which enforcement and punishment. So, in this book, there will have two versions of it, which is the positive one and the negative one. So, we move on to the positive reinforcement, which is the occurrence of a behavior is followed by the addition of a stimulus or an increase in the intensity of a stimulus, which result in the strengthening of the behavior. So, for example, the teacher reward their student for getting a good grade with a sticker. So the next one will be the negative reinforcement. So negative reinforcement is the occurrence of a behavior. It's followed by the removal of a stimulus, a negative stimulus, or a decrease in the intensity of a stimulus, which result in the strengthening of the behavior. So, for example, a child that throws a tantrum because of he doesn't want to eat vegetables will take will be taken away his damn vegetables. So the next one is punishment. So a punisher, or also called as an aversive stimulus, is a consequence that make a particular behavior less likely to occur in the future. So we'll have to give an example. So a boy named Otis will receive a painful stimulus, which is burning in his hand because he was grabbing the cast iron skillet. So this is the type of punishment that make the his behavior to be less likely to occur in the future. So the positive punishment is the occurrence of a behavior. It's followed by the presentation of an adverse stimulus, and as a result, the behavior is likely to occur in the future. So the negative one, the occurrence of a behavior is followed by the removal of a reinforcing stimulus, and as a result, the behavior is likely to occur in the future. So that is all from our group. I hope you enjoy and understand for what we have to say in this presentation. So thank you very much, and that is all from us. Thank you again.